everyone, and welcome to another episode of the U Talk Show. My name is Kyle, this is Horst, and today we have a lovely episode for you where we are talking about... Horst, what are we talking about?
It's Civics Week Part 3, and we're talking about how laws are made.
Cool.
Historically speaking, you might have heard it sort of portrayed in the media, your sort of old westerns, why there ought to be a law. And in many respects, that is how the law used to be made. A person would find a situation that they found objectionable that wasn't actually technically illegal. They would go to their elected officials, or maybe it's a small town, they'd go to the town's governing board or sheriff, and they'd say, why, this happened and there ought to be a law. And that's how the process would get kicked off. These days, we have a few checks and balances in the way of that. You would certainly have heard of someone saying, oh, there are gay people in front of my children, there ought to be a law. No, there oughtn't to be a law, Karen. There oughtn't to be a law. And our system is very good at making sure that laws like that do not actually reflect reasonable norms do not become a blight on our moral character. So, Kyle, what did they teach you about how laws were made?
So as I have stated in episode 1 of Civics Week, they didn't teach us much. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, I was homeschooled, but tried a year and a quarter of primary school and half a year of high school. Primary school was all right. High school was a nightmare. So in primary school, we were taught there were 3 levels of government and not really anything else. So I wasn't taught anything. How I learned how laws were made was when I actually did research myself. And I found this nice little diagram. It's a nice, neat little diagram, and it was kind of like up and down, and basically just showed the path of, bills introduced or legislation's introduced, then first round debate, amendments offered, second round debate, and then like first and second reading of the bills, and then, it gets passed through different, parliaments with that process. And then through the different, houses of parliament with that process. And then it has royal assent, which is where the governor general's like, tick, it's good. And that's that's my understanding, roughly.
That's fundamentally correct. I'm currently at TAFE doing legal services, and my current unit is Apply Understanding of the Principles of the Australian Legal System. But what they actually talk about is understand how the law is made, understand how Australia's legal system functions. And what Kyle has just described is basically correct. There's a lot of boring detail that is of interest only to lawyers and constitutional scholars, but a policy is decided upon, a bill is drafted and brought before Parliament, bills are considered by Parliament, both houses of Parliament, and if the Parliament signs off on those bills, maybe they go back, maybe they get edited and adjusted, maybe that happens a few times. The bills are submitted for royal assent at the federal level by the Governor General and at the state level by the state governor. Once those have been approved, those become acts of Parliament, and they are law. They are a part of the social fabric that sits underneath us. I think I mentioned in part 1 that you cannot just head off to a different state and hope that murder is legal there. That's because, interestingly enough, murder is frowned upon. And murder would be frowned upon even if it were not against the law. There are traditions going back tens of thousands of years that say that if you are the sort of absolute moron who thinks it's okay to murder people, you are probably not very healthy to have in society. But our laws reflect our values as humans. And so it sort of was inevitable that we would end up with a number of crimes act saying, hey, murder's bad. You shouldn't do it. And if you do it, we're going to have to remove you from society for a bit.
Mm. Now that's the technical way that laws are made. So let's get into the practicality of it. You know that
Please
meme
don't.
where
I
it's
don't
like,
want to talk about corruption.
oh no, I am hijacking this episode for a hot minute because that is the technical way that laws get made. But let's face it, by the time they hit the parliament, for the most part, it's already been decided. You know, if it's hit the parliament, like if it's actually been put on the parliamentary floor, then for the most part, not a whole lot of amendments are going to be offered. Not a whole lot needs to be negotiated. It's all been done in a backroom deal, and the basis of it was money changing hands. That is a political donation being made, and the law being drafted mostly by those people who
I
made
promise
the
you,
donation.
Kyle, I promise you, I did not have to part with millions of dollars to a Liberal Party member to get it written down that murder is bad. I promise. I promise. Murder has been bad forever.
I don't know.
Gotta believe, bruv. You gotta believe. Swear on me mum.
What are you, New Zealand now? Swear on me mum's life, bro.
Oh.
Yeah. All right. So I'm done hijacking the episode for a hot minute.
Although, interestingly enough, the backroom deals are not just to do with Parliament. Because we have in Australia multiple types of law. That's right. You heard it here first. It's not just Parliament. So, Parliament has the ability to create acts of Parliament. This is why you hear a lot of laws referred to as the X Act. For instance, the Casinos Act. Because it's not the casinos law, it was an act of Parliament. For all the good it did them. But we have two other sources of law in Australia. The first we've discussed is referred to in legal terms as statute law. They are statutes that have been decided, that have gone before Parliament, that have received royal assent through democratic process in action. The second is delegated law. Delegated law is fun. Delegated law means that we have a regulation that is written without having to go before Parliament and without having to receive royal assent, because the power is vested in the person who makes that law by a previous act of Parliament.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that can also be vested not in a single person, but in organizations like bureaucracies, correct?
That is absolutely correct. It is, in fact, most commonly vested in the position of an office or in a government department. For instance,
hence, sorry to keep interrupting, but hence why ministers have what's called discretionary powers. Essentially, it's their ability to make the laws, or to make certain rules, which are law.
That's correct.
Yeah, I guess an interesting but not Australian example of this would be the Federal Communications Commission in the US, having the right to determine who is and is not a carrier service, and how that has affected the internet over there. The idea being that if the internet is not considered a carrier service, then internet service providers can throttle the internet speeds for certain websites, and even charge more to get better speeds on certain websites, and play around, essentially effectively destroying the internet as it was intended for.
It's not the example that I was thinking of, but we actually do have a very similar body in Australia which has a delegated power, and that is the Australian Communications and Media Authority. You may
Interesting.
have heard. You may have
Tell me a
heard
little bit about them,
on.
actually. I'd like to know a little bit about their various. I guess what's their field of what's the word there? Like what does that encompass? Is what I'm trying to ask. What does their duties and authority encompass?
It's weird. But the first thing I can think of, almost everyone will have heard this on the radio in the car at some point. The Broadcast Communications Code of Conduct. For questions about the code, contact this radio station or the ACMA. You'll have heard this whenever you're listening to newscasts or in the middle of ad blocks, or if a radio station is explaining why they don't want the F word before 7 p.m. The Australian Communications and Media Authority covers broadcast media. Effectively, that's radio and TV.
Would podcasts come
Gets
under
wibbly. I beg your pardon?
Would podcasts come under that? Because a podcast is.
If we wanted to hijack a TV transmitter somewhere and like inject our signal, so that everyone was like hearing us instead of Alan Jones blathering, apart from the fact that we'd be committing a federal offense, yes, that would be the ACMA's business.
Okay. All right.
However,
I'm more
they
thinking,
have
like,
attempted to discuss the internet and mediation of content on the internet. I think I've mentioned to you before that a huge problem with the NBN was that Labor's then Minister for the Digital Economy was Stephen Conroy, who was not very literate about the area that he'd been given. He wasn't able to effectively advocate one way or the other because he was a political appointee instead of a technical appointee. But under that proposed scheme, the ACMA would be responsible. Under Senator Conroy's proposed clean feed scheme, the ACMA would be responsible for the administration of a agreeable internet for the average wholesome, family-minded Australian.
An agreeable internet. Oh, yeah. Sweet summer child.
That's your delegated law. Delegated law means that the Parliament can say, we are giving this body the power to make further laws as necessary in this area. It would be highly irregular for the Minister for Immigration to make a law pertaining to the safety requirements for a car to be licensable. But it's perfectly regular for the Minister for Immigration to issue pro hac vice decrees that a person whose matter is before the Administrative Affairs Tribunal might be allowed to remain in Australia, having already made a life here. And that is delegated law. The third is common law. Now,
yes, I've heard of. I don't quite have this.
Common law is a completely bad name. Common law is a stupid name.
What should it be called?
I have no bloody idea, but it shouldn't be that. To my mind, common law is that, you know, if you live with a lass, or if you're a lass, if you live with a lad, or if you're someone and you live with someone for like 15 years, for the purposes of everything that depends on it, you're as good as married. You get to see them on their deathbed. You don't get locked out of the hospital room because someone's being uppity just because you didn't get married. To my mind, that's what common law means. It's a socially agreed upon set of norms that aren't codified into law but are nonetheless respected. What common law actually means is case law. When we talked in part 1 about how the judiciary is called upon to make determinations about what the law means, even in cases where there is not a clear breach. When we look at common law, what we actually mean is The law doesn't explicitly say this, but if you look at this case that went before the federal court 14 years ago, the justices found that this. And when we look at the bulk of these findings over the years, we have what is referred to as the common law. I have heard it referred to as judge-made law, but that is an even worse name because it just doesn't come off the tongue properly.
It almost seems like it should be called arbitration law.
Arbitration is a different procedure of the courts.
I mean, true, but in a sense, this is kind of like arbitration.
I'd call it judicial law myself. I'd call it judicial law, as in it's law made by the judiciary. But I don't have a better name for it. But that's the third type of law. We give judges the power necessarily under the separation of powers. We give judges the power to independently determine where there is ambiguity, what a law means. And it's a little bit more complicated than this, of course. But broadly speaking, when a future judge is hearing a substantially similar matter, they will refer to precedents. They will refer to cases that have been heard in other courts by other judges, and they will use those to inform their decision. Some of those decisions are what we would call binding, as in they are, like, if you go against this, you're actually a moron. Some of them are merely
when you say actually a moron,
very
in
solid
legal
argument.
terms, what does that mean? Like you're breaking the law?
It means that if you go against this, practically the matter is ripe for appeal. Appeals come in multiple flavors. Appeals can be there was an error in the facts. Appeals can be there was an error in the law. And appeals can mean occasionally that there was an error in the magistrate or the judge. The latter variant is rare because nobody wants to actually say, oh, that judge really did screw up there. Heck. Nobody wants to say that about their colleagues.
That may very, once a blue moon, like, happen. But, it's
absolutely
rare. I assume it's probably rare to appeal that, even in those circumstances.
Yes, but if you wanted leave to appeal, all you would need to say is, this substantially similar case heard under a binding court found opposite to me, and in this case it was found in this way instead, and I don't think that's right.
And that's what we call legal precedent, correct?
Yes, that is legal precedent.
Okay, interesting.
And legal precedent is as good as law.
Yeah. Is there anything else to sort of define here? Because we're about to run out of time, but it seems like we've covered it.
The only other thing is, going back to why there ought to be a law, is that many policies do start as notes of a ministerial meeting with a member of the community. And I know you said earlier that this is sometimes a backroom thing where money changes hands and the matter's basically decided and it's fait accompli.
More so that member of the community is a corporate executive who at some point beforehand hands the party a ton of money.
That's what I'm referring to. I'm saying that in some cases that is very much the case. For instance, I know that the Greyhound racing lobby was very, very vigorously advocating for the ongoing legality of racing dogs for a while. Like that sort of thing absolutely does happen. But the thing that I wanted to draw attention to here is that we've also had a situation where a child has written in to their member of parliament because they were doing some homework and they found something that was a gaping hole in the law. I don't remember the specifics, but I believe it was vaguely related to slavery. And they've written in and they've just gone, surely, this can't be the case. Can you please explain? What am I missing? And the member has looked at that and gone, I'm surely missing something too. And they've spoken to their colleagues, and it's quietly gone through Parliament and been fixed before it becomes a problem.
Yeah. No, that's
So
yeah.
this isn't
That
just
that I
big
find
corporations. This isn't just people with bags of money. It's ordinary, everyday people who
yeah,
have
and
the
that's why
ability to submit a policy for consideration.
yeah, and that's why it's important to contact your member of parliament if you think the law needs a change. You know,
Mhm.
if you find where you think the system or the law has erred, then you should contact your member of parliament. You should talk to them. You know, in my mind, it's a civic duty. But with that, we'll end it because we are
So
about to run out
remember,
of time.
everyone, do your civic duty and eat a democracy sausage. Not having a democracy sausage on polling day is un-Australian.
Indeed. Catch you later.